Now that I'm older, I've realized that there's obviously no one single way of building a business. I think the best way to do it is figure out what is your way.
I'm joined in the studio by a very good friend, the one, the only, Renier Kriel, everybody.
To be honest, that's really where we find joy and fulfillment in life, not in being rich. It's like when I actually got a really bad hand, but I played it really well and I ended up somewhere.
Coming into the open letter, why did you start?
Working in startup space for a very long time, I always wanted a product like the open letter.
So we were speaking about monetization before we started rolling. Tell us about the challenges.
What we do is we offer a marketing arbitrage. We can convince someone to sign up to our newsletter for substantially less. We do media sales, we run some sponsored ads, but we've also successfully managed to package a
So, building something, you generating an audience. How do you ensure that there's a constant kind of feedback loop? Whatever you learn from fostering two-way communication.
Yeah, so we need to do way more of it. But a very interesting chat I had with someone who worked in a magazine space for a very long time.
Quick one. Over the past year, we've been sharing stories of impactful individuals across the continent, and this channel has been growing thanks to each and every one of you tuning in every week to watch these videos. But we have noticed that more than 70% of you who watch this content are not subscribed. So please hit that subscribe button, and I promise to bring you the stories of more impactful individuals across this continent.
Renier, throughout your career, you've worn many hats. And, for someone who wears many hats, they have many passions. What was your favorite hat to wear?
I think probably when I realized working at the incubator at French South African Tech Labs, working with the founders was really enjoyable and helping them figure out how to make their next move. Like they got stuck on something, they had a specific problem they wanted to solve. And there aren't any simple answers when it comes to building a startup. Everything is nuanced. There's something unique about how they need to go to market or how specifically they need to package their product, or the list is endless. So sitting with founders and actually figuring out what could work, helping them formulate that plan, seeing them execute, and then 9 out of 10 times it didn't go exactly as planned. But that's learnings, right? And then you iterate again and you try, and then sometimes it works. And when it works, it's so great to see, okay, there's progress, there's movement, there's a new customer, there's validation on the product, and really enjoyed that. And that really paved the way for, some of the things we're doing today.
Yeah, that's very rewarding when it does happen. I feel like it's almost like a drug, right? And I'm sure that's why you've been in the space for such a long time. It's just the people, the ideas, the talent that we have in South Africa and in the tech space is just next level. For the context of this conversation, what's your background and how did you get to this point of your journey? If you give us a quick summary.
Yeah, awesome. I'm Stellenbosch University graduate, studied engineering, industrial engineering. And then post-university, I actually worked at the CSIR, believe it or not, for 10 months in a department called Defense, Peace, Safety and Security, developing military equipment, doing research on military equipment to be used by the South African Army and Air Force and Navy and the likes. And the process working with those kind of things is quite slow. You work with human life, like people using equipment. You don't want them to get into a difficult situation or potentially put their lives at risk. So when you develop equipment, you have to write specifications and adhere to policies and restrictions and all kinds of things. So it takes quite long to get anything developed. And that's quite the opposite of how things move in the startup life, right? So after 10 months, I loved working there. I loved the people. The pace was just too slow. Some of the most intelligent people I've ever met in my life work there. And
are they engineers?
All engineers, yeah. Electronic engineers, mechanical engineers, mostly Stellenbosch graduates. So the best of the best. So worked there for 10 months, and then a friend of mine was actually one of the very first PHP developers in South Africa. So slightly technical, but the internet of old was basically just HTML, it was static pages. And then there was something called Web 2.0, which is basically the ability for us to start building applications on the web. And at that point, ASP was the framework that was in favor. It was you needed Microsoft SQL Server. It was quite expensive and limiting for small businesses to actually get that kind of setup. So there was an open source project called PHP at the time, which was the equivalent, but just it was based on C. So one of my friends in Pretoria from school, I actually met online. We used to play computer games together online on 56K modems, believe it or not.
Wow.
We played Age of Empires together online. We were number 1 and 2 in South Africa. And he then was one of the first PHP developers in South Africa. He had some clients because a lot of clients didn't want to go to Microsoft route. They wanted to go to Linux route, open source route. So he developed a few things and quickly he grew a software business into, I think, 30, 40 people, clients across the country. They specifically had Media24 as a client on the Dot Publishing, and they were based in Cape Town. And he reached out to me and said, look, they want to establish a presence on the side. Can I pull together like 3 developers at least and see if we can start a company? So that's what we did. We rented a massively oversized office in Technopark because we thought it's easy to build a business. We can hire 100 developers in the next few months. We sat in that big office for 2 years, not hiring anyone, just trying to figure out how to actually build a business. But we started servicing Media24 and a few other clients. And then we built our very first iPhone app. And this is in a company called 4i, which is a company that I founded. We built our very first iPhone app. Someone asked us if we can build an iPhone app when the App Store just came out. This is 15 years ago on iOS 2.3. So just the App Store launched on iOS 2. So iOS 2.3, we built South Africa's first transacting mobile app probably. You could put in your credit card details and buy prepaid electricity. So it's an app called PowerTime. Still runs to this day actually.
Wow.
And
How
then
did you guys know to build it, or how did you figure out how to build it?
Jeez, we said, how hard can it be? Let's figure it out. And I had one of the guys who started the company with me, Yuri, a good friend from Basti. We were in race together. He said, cool, you'll give it a crack and figure it out. So first day when we started figuring out how to do this, we realized we needed a Mac. We didn't have a Mac. You can't code an iPhone app on a Windows machine. You need a Mac. So we need to buy a Mac, and then we found a Mac on Gumtree. So we built this iPhone app, and that's really what started for us this wave of people going, can you build mobile apps for us? So much so that I think about a year later we pivoted the company to only focus on mobile apps. It was a big push from all kinds of operators to build different apps. So Nokia gave us a lot of money to build Nokia apps, so did BlackBerry. Android and iPhone never paid anybody, but everybody wanted Android and iPhone apps. So we were constantly building apps for all phones.
And were they coming to you?
So they put out a tender, they found us, they asked us to pitch, we pitched, we won it against all the big guys. They wanted to work with small guys. It was awesome. Like our company took 5 steps up when we landed MTN as a customer. Wow. Because not only, they paid well, but you could now say, we work with MTN. Everybody's well, they sell phones, they must know who's the best. So we ended up building Checkers app. They had this coupon app, not the 6060 one, it's before 6060. We built, who else? We built Takealot's first app. Actually, if you on the iPhone app on Takealot, if you put something in your cart, there's a toast that comes down at the top. It says it's in your cart. That's still our original toast.
Wow.
They probably rebuilt it, but it still looks like the one we put in, 10 years ago. And Takealot was still a small company then. We worked directly with the CEO at the time, Kim Reed.
Wow.
So we engaged directly with him. He gave us feedback. He sat in our office, tested the app with us. It was pretty cool. But like I said, we were native app developers. And what happened is we were always looking at these cross-platform solutions. PhoneGap was one of them. You write HTML code and then you push it to iPhone and Android, and then it works on both devices. But at the time, we were building native Android, native iOS, so 2 sets of code, so double the price really. And PhoneGap was really never good enough. So we looked at it and we thought, this is never going to work. You're always going to build native. And then overnight, React Native, which is a project that was backed by Facebook, became quite popular and actually became quite good. To this day, there's not many use cases that need native apps. You can actually build a React Native or an Angular app and deploy it both to iOS and Android, and they work fine.
Well, I didn't know that it was backed by Facebook.
Yeah. So it's an open source project, but Facebook actually, the React was used by Facebook in one of their first web applications.
Okay.
So, back in the day, the ability for a static web browser to pop up and say there's a message
Yeah.
or show you, a notification inbox, that was all done using React because it could asynchronously speak to the browser and actually update the view real time without you having to refresh the page.
Gotcha.
So React, a version of that is React Native, which then allowed to deploy to mobile devices, and it became very quickly became popular overnight. We literally had 6 clients tell us if we don't move to React Native, like they don't want to work with us anymore. And we were a bit bullish about React Native is not the answer, and then they were serious about not working with us anymore. So we lost a lot of clients. We lost half our revenue within 6 months. Staff complement of 50, so we had to downscale like super fast.
And what year was this?
This was in 2016, 2017. So we had to downscale from 50 down to 30, and then we slowly had to start getting React Native going. But the company was constantly on a back foot, like it wasn't in a great place.
And how did you essentially, get things up again, or essentially continue the growth and maintain?
So while we were on the growth phase, Christoph from Monetising, who now does Africa Renier, we were doing really well, and he gave me a call one day, and he's like, "Hey, we've got they recently had an exit, they've got a bit of capital, and they'd like to invest in a company like ours. Are we open?" I'm like, "No, we're fine. We're doing really great. Like, no thanks. I'm flattered." But when we started to downscale, I'm like, "Okay, cool. I need bigger support. We need more cash flow to make this thing work." And I reached out to Christoph again. I'm like, "Hey, if that deal's still on the table, I'm keen to have a conversation." And we did have a conversation, and we did end up doing a deal where we did a deal to absorb 4i into the Metis group. And eventually it was rebranded as Metis. It still has a small presence in Stellenbosch.
And what did you learn from that kind of M&A process?
Well, I could probably take it a few steps back. Like, when we're doing well, I was in my 20s and maybe early 30s, and very arrogant about, me making money because I'm looking at, the bottom line and it's green and it's looking healthy. The thing that I learned there is like it's obviously you get told that if you make profit, that's a good thing. That's not entirely true. That's a half truth. It's a good thing if you make profit and you have a pretty good idea exactly how and why. Okay. So if we didn't completely understand why we were making money, but we were, right? And one of the core reasons why we were making money is we were on a wave, right? So we were riding this mobile app wave and everybody wanted to build apps. But we didn't see it for what it was. We thought we're indestructible and we're awesome. We're the Titanic, here we go. But the reality of the fact was this wave was going to die at some point, and because we didn't see it, we couldn't anticipate when that was going to happen.
Yeah, not sustainable.
Yeah, because of that, like we were completely vulnerable when it did happen. So I think that is a very important lesson, is to understand exactly where you are in relation to the market, how you are perceived, where it's moving, what's happening. And then after that, looking at, okay, are you making money now? And how is it going to sustain you? How's it going to work, etc. I actually think someone that's not making money, but they know why they're not making money. They don't know how to make money, but they know that they're not, and they don't know why. That's a much better place to be than making money and not, knowing why. Because you're not vulnerable to, lose it all.
Yeah.
I mean, you're starting off that base, which is ground zero anyway. So you're like, cool, I can just keep trying.
And then just topic specifically, what's your opinion on perhaps diversifying revenue streams?
So I think diversifying business models is probably a good idea. So revenue streams can sometimes be a bit of a distraction. So, if I say diversify business models, in an agency, one of the biggest problems in an agency is, we had retainers and they would pay us monthly, but they all had notices of 1 or 2 months to cancel the retainers. Now they all cancel at the same time. So if we had a business model that looked a bit different to that, it could have covered us a bit in that space. Or some clients on one model, some on the other. One could have covered the other. I think a big problem early on, when we started we said we do software development, right? So, I'd be at a bar and someone says, what do you do? Well, we do software development. What kind? It's like, well, what kind of software do you want? And the problem with that statement is if you go home tonight and you have a burst pipe, right? Are you going to phone a handyman or are you going to phone a plumber?
Probably a plumber.
Plumber, right. Even if the handyman could do a better job at it, you wouldn't know because you'll just phone the plumber, right? And the same way when we said we do software development, we were like handyman. So you don't get called for specific things. As soon as we said we do mobile apps, standing at a bar and someone says, what do you do? We build mobile apps. Okay, cool. I actually have a friend that wants to build a mobile app. Let me introduce you. Whereas if I said we build any kind of software, I wouldn't have gotten that introduction. So I think early on, it's super important to have a focus in a way that you can explain it to someone at a bar, and there's a good chance they know someone that actually wants that. So if you can do that makes the message go a bit further and farther. Or just make the message go further because people can explain it to other people. If it's too generic, if it's too broad, it's hard to explain it to other people. And then you're just shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, and I think also just on this point, I think a lot of founders don't understand themselves what they offer or what their core offer is. And what makes them unique, and therefore when they go to the bar, it's just very much a generalist as opposed to a specialist.
It out, yeah.
Correct.
And that's natural. I mean, I even do it now when I build things, but it's almost that's why quick iterations make a lot of sense. You need to almost pick, well, if I've got 5 things this could be, let me pick the one which I think I could have the most success with, which by the way is not always obvious. Because what that would look like for me is different to what it would look like for you. I know different people. I've got a different set of skills. I've got a different way of selling. I could be much more successful focusing on this thing, where you could be much more successful focusing on something else. So if you figure out what that is, it's almost to say, okay, how quickly can I get repetitions on this thing? If my focus is to do X, how many people can I try and sell this to in the next week? Okay. And if I try and sell it in the next week and I don't get any traction, I don't think that's going to work. Right now I can move to the next one. And I think people in South Africa generally go, the market is so small, let me try a bit of all 5. The problem is you just don't learn all 5 fast enough.
Yeah. You just don't have the capacity. You
don't. And because if the mission in the early days is to learn as fast as possible, you need to pick one and double down and go do max reps on this one so I can learn as much about this approach to figure out if it's going to work or not. And if it's not, just bin it and move to the next one.
Yeah.
But, we go, let's slow dev for a year on 5 different approaches at the same time.
And hope one
and none of them actually get enough traction to make it work. And it's a trap because it's constantly like you get yourself really uncomfortable. Right? Something doesn't look like it's working or it's not working as you anticipated. And then it's very easy to go, let's pick another vertical and try and sell this thing. Right? Because that's more comfortable. It looks like I can get traction. And sometimes you even get a deal in that space. It's just a distraction. Right? So it's almost, forcing yourself to be uncomfortable and go, let me do this thing that I actually picked until I've hit criteria that says it's either going to work or not.
Yeah.
And then move on to the next thing.
How do you differentiate between a distraction and what is actually perhaps something that you're moving in the right direction?
That's a great question. I don't have a set formula of doing it. However, I think something that's important that I rely on quite a lot, right? I think now that I'm older, I've realized that there's obviously no one single way of building a business. Which, in the beginning years, you read a lot of books, and books are great, by all means read them, but it can give you a sense of that's the way out to do it. Okay? I think the best way to do it is figure out what is your way. So for me personally, I'm very much a feel person. So if something feels like it's right, if something feels like it can work, I'd love to go in that direction and try it until it feels like it doesn't work. And I think that's where it gets difficult for me. So when it doesn't feel right anymore, it's hard for me to distinguish, is this actually the kind of feeling that should get me to pivot, or is this just uncomfortable, I need to push through? So I rely a lot on my wife there, and she talks sense into me and go, no, it's just a setback, it's not the end of the road, like just try a different angle or try something else.
I think that's also a good point. Basically what you're talking about is perhaps your intuition, that gut feeling, right? How did you develop yours over time?
I think it's more like getting confidence in it. Like, the more repetitions you do, the more you realize, okay, yeah, that was actually the right decision. Like, that was the right way to go. Simply based on, I felt that was the right decision. And it would have been, I felt it was the right decision. I did make it and end up being a good decision. But, I mean, I've met different founders doing things differently. Other founders are very analytical and they like to plan meticulously. And it works really well for them. The problem is, if you hesitate in your own style, you're just going to waste time. So I've made peace with the fact that this is how I do it. There are downsides to doing it, but this is how I like to operate and move and do things. And it's more enjoyable for me. I can move faster. I'm less frustrated. And I'm playing to my strengths.
Got you.
So, and I think that's very important for each founder to really figure out, like, well, what is my style? Like, how do I like to build things? Because there's no perfect way.
Another question I had was, you mentioned that you downsized and had to go from 50 to 30. How did it feel to let people go?
Horrible, man. Horrible. I made a lot of mistakes. Didn't always do it right. Didn't always do it. The problem is, it's such a conflicting thing because you've got your own ambitions, desires, personal well-being, wealth, all of that stuff tied up on the one side, right? Then you've got an organization that actually employs a lot of people that depend on the salaries of it. They have families. And then, you have customers which you have to continue to do the work for. And inevitably there's going to be a compromise here because the structure and the design that was in place wasn't working. So now you have to cut stuff. You have to let people go, right? And the problem is, if you don't let people go, the remaining people won't be able to survive because the organization cannot function with what's been put on it, right? So we went conservatively first in terms of downsizing because we're like, no, things will turn around. Retrospect, we should have cut half the people immediately and have the remaining people be overworked. But that would have put us in a way better position. So it's almost like, long-term would put us in a way better position because then you can hire again, you can take a different approach, maybe use contractors, maybe de-risk a lot. In business, risk and money is kind of interchangeable. Actuaries get this really well. That's why they make a lot of money. But insurance is built on that principle, right? I pay a certain amount because I want to offset the risk of if something bad were to happen. That company in its state made money, but it was inherently very risky. So when you build, you can often think about, let's make money, but you have to at the same time also think about risk. Like if I hired 50 people and I lose 5 clients, what's going to happen? That's extremely risky. So we didn't think about the risk. We thought about growth and making money, and all of those indicators were right, but we never stopped to assess, like, well, what risk do we have here? Like, how quickly can we downsize if we wanted to? And we weren't ready for that.
And you weren't thinking about in terms of like runway. So you've got 50 people and you've got clients, but you mentioned that there's a problem with perhaps most of those clients were on retainers.
Yeah.
So even if you're projecting a runway of 5 years, those retainers, if all of them stop at the end of year 1, you're in big trouble.
And the sales cycle of getting a new customer on board is very long, right? So look, I still have PTSD of agency businesses. I've learned a lot. I ran one for 15 years. I still consult a lot of people that have agency businesses. I think they're great. They're easy to start, right? You started by having your first client and you sell to them, and then you hire another person with a similar skill set to yours, and you double up on resources, and the cash flow can grow because month 1 you break even. You're going to pay you at the end of the month. You don't need a lot of capital to get it going. They're really hard to scale. They're really hard to enjoy when they get big. Because you always have people issues. You have unhappy clients, then you have staff that's pushing for more money, less work time, better lifestyles, and those things just clash.
Those individuals that do that build successful consulting firms or perhaps service-based businesses, agencies, I think that that's what they know. They know to essentially, here is a problem. Here is a client that's going to pay me. If I do the work, they're going to pay me at the end of the month. And then they, double down and just do that. And of course, there's lots of successful agencies, but yeah, I definitely hear you on the challenges.
And look, you can make good money. I mean, I think people might find the numbers interesting. If you have 20 to 30 people kind of in a product engineering design space, you can make anything from 20 to 30 million rand a year. Probably make 5 to 10 million rand profit after tax. If you run a lean ship with low, management overhead, like most of the people are billable, and if you're a solo shareholder, if you and someone else built it, like making 5 million rand profit a year after getting a salary for it, and do that for 10 years, and I mean you can close the business. You're pretty much set for life, right? So I think it's not bad in that sense. It's actually. A lot of people look down at it and they go, it's not $1 billion business. But I mean, let's be honest, like how many people, build a net worth of 50 million plus building a business in South Africa anyway? It's quite a small percentage.
Correct.
So if you take that route and you stick it out for 10 years, you can make really good money.
And let's talk about some of the things they can do to essentially scale that. So of course, the first perhaps being expansion into other regions, right? What are the challenges with that?
So I think getting a first customer overseas is the number one priority if you want to expand, and particularly a customer that would refer you and introduce you to network. Because if you get that down and you do good work, then it works well. But expansion in an agency, in my mind, there's two ways to do it that minimizes risk and increases your chance of profit. So the one is kind of going the sweatshop route, where you go, we're just going to try and hire as many good people as possible. And we're going to place them at cost plus 10% at corporates who can't hire fast enough. And we'll kind of add some stuff to it to make life great for them, send them nice kids, do a nice retreat, some nice company benefits. But it is what it is, high churn, and you just develop an engine to hire and place people. So it's not a tech business, right? It's a business that understands developers. Right, and because they understand developers, they build an HR system or a recruitment system that manages to get a great amount of people in, and then they have the ability to sell those people. So
a very strong system in place.
Yeah, and it's not a tech business. They can use tech, but it's definitely not a.
Yeah.
It's not a. People think, you get into tech and you build a tech. That's not a tech business. That's a recruitment placement business. So that's the one. You scale it to 200 people. So average salary of 50,000 a month, make 10% on that, and then you can make $1 million a month, and then bit of overage, you can build a good business. Not without pain, by the way, but that's the one way. The other way, which I think is more desirable, something I would potentially consider doing again, is you go very niche. So you knuckle down on an industry that is very scarce on the resources. You can, like stuff like machine learning at the moment, like everybody's looking for machine learning or AI engineers, right? So you go find 5 of the absolute best people, you pay them really well, and you do extremely complicated projects at extremely high margins. So that's also nice because it's very contained. The risk is low in terms of, particularly because you have high margins, but also because the resources you have is on such high demand that they'll almost never be on the bench. So those two are extremes for a reason, because most people play in the middle, and that's where it's dangerous, in my opinion. That's where we were as well. Like, you're not really that size or that simplicity or that low amount of risk, but you also not small and niche enough that you can be nimble and charge a premium.
Yeah, the niche thing is really, that's a good point. I think because of, yes, the reasons you mentioned, but also you're learning as you go, right? So by year 2, someone who's starting off, you have 24 months of experience over that person, plus the network that comes with it. So I think there's lots of benefits to that.
And Spatial Edge is an example of that, right? I mean, they've been doing stuff like this forever. And now it's like there's so much knowledge within that organization that exists between just the people who've worked there for a long time that it's really hard for anybody to compete with them.
Definitely. Going into FSAT Labs, so you now essentially get merged with Metis. And one of the things that you've also did in your time there, mistake me if I'm wrong, is run FSAP Labs. What was that experience like? And what did you learn from those founders in terms of their mentality and how they view things?
So maybe a bit of context. So Metis had a deal with CEDA, where they co-funded what's called the French South African Tech Labs. And it had a set up co-working space in Century City. And at the time, the model was, assisting a few startups per year. But I at the time looked at Y Combinator. I'm like, we have to build Y Combinator in South Africa. Like everybody is. So many people have tried it or thought about it, and still don't think it's the right thing to do in Africa, but that's a different conversation. But we said, cool, can we do 6 to 8 entrepreneurs, founders every 6 months? So do 2 cohorts per year. And then we started that. So we had, I think in the 2.5 years, about 24, 26 founders that I worked with. And initially, that was before COVID, I think 2019 I started there. So we did a season before COVID, another one before COVID, then one in COVID. And it's fascinating. We got 90 to 100 applications per season, which amazed me. Like, I don't think we would get 20, but we got a lot. Of them, about 20 were high quality, people building really interesting things. We ended up working about 6 to 8 per cohort. And very interestingly, the founders that you think initially will definitely make it aren't always ones that would. The ones that don't look like they're going to make it sometimes surprise you, and people just put in the work. So I realized that it's very hard to judge founder quality on just a few interactions. Like, I don't know how VCs do it. Frankly, I wouldn't do it. If I ever were to do investment, I wouldn't do it like that. You can't just see a deck and have a few conversations. Like, honestly, the problem is good salespeople can navigate through all of that and have zero substance at the back. And I think it happens a lot of the times. And I know people do due diligence, but I'm talking about very early stage, concept phase.
And it's different to do DD on the person over a
period of time.
Yeah, the quality that you need.
So that was very interesting. In incubator, we work with them for 6 months, right? So you get a feel for work rate, how they think, what they do. Like, would have been very easy for me at the end of that to go, cool, you can invest in that guy, this guy, that lady. Like, you could see who's going to make it just based on how they do it. Even if their first startup didn't make it, like, you could tell they will make it because of how they go about it. So that was awesome, very interesting. Also fascinating to learn how much support there is from government actually for founders through the CEDA technology program, STP. So CEDA is the Small Enterprise Development Agency. At the time, they had about 300 to 400 million rand a year that they give to about 100 different incubators and accelerators across South Africa, supporting so many startups, not many tech startups, lots of small businesses.
Okay.
The French South African Tech Labs was focused on startups, and Savant is another one that's part of that program, focusing on startups. So quite surprised by the amount of money that government was willing to put in there. I think they're doing great work. I think that we can do a lot better. I think a lot of the money could be directed in areas which would have a bigger impact.
Where would you direct the money?
I think a big challenge that they have is the metrics that they measure different incubators are not really helping what those incubators are trying to do. So we were often penalized because we weren't creating enough jobs, because the big mandate was creating jobs with that money. And we're building tech startups. Yeah. We're making net profit after tax here. We're not making jobs. Is not the primary focus here, because profit generates indirect jobs, right? So someone makes a large amount of money, they hire
tax.
2 people to come and work in their house, they pay tax, the kids go to private school, they employ other people. So all of that actually has a roll-on effect. So
circulation.
I think anything that government measures, if they start measuring more in terms of the economic impact as opposed to the direct impact. One person earning a salary of 100K a month, like, what does that mean from a not only taxation perspective but an economic activity perspective? Because that person buys stuff with the money they have, right? They go to restaurants, they they order Uber Eats. And all of that creates more jobs and more taxation. So the more wealthy people we have, the more economic activity there will be.
Of course. I think I'm trying to play devil's advocate here and talk about, is that contributing towards like the rich getting richer compared to perhaps bringing the low to the middle and the middle to the high?
Yeah, I think I think free market principles are awesome. I think where it gets complicated is if you start arguing around, well, did everybody get the same start? Because obviously no one did. No one in the world got the same start. And I believe it's almost a thing that we need to say, well, it is what it is. Each individual needs to take accountability and say, well, what can I do with what's in my hand, what I got dealt, right? And to be honest, like that's really where we find joy and fulfillment in life. Not in being rich, not in being as rich as that person is rich. It's like when I actually got a really bad hand, but I played it really well and I ended up somewhere. And actually setting it up for my children and the next generation to launch off my ceiling. That's really, and I've got 3 kids and I've really seen it in our lives. Like, my wife and I, our parents weren't very wealthy, but I mean, we grew up probably way more comfortable than many people in South Africa. But the ability for us to stand on their ceiling and have that as our floor and now go, cool, we've got the opportunity to take it a few steps further. So, rich getting richer, I think we need to have a system, and a system, I'm talking about an economic system and a society that actually rewards people for hard work and good work and work that adds value. Okay? Now, to a large extent, we have that, but to a large extent, we don't. Right? I mean, just some of the stuff, as BEE and those things aside, I think there's a place for that as well. But if you think about just government and corruption, like people get rewarded for taking shortcuts, and that's not helping the system. So on the one hand, you go, well, money is wasted, but there's a deeper inherent problem. There's a culture of getting rewarded for not doing hard work. Right? So we need to fight that culture. We need to get to a culture where, and it's the same. I kind of have a bit of a controversial take, I guess, about the Vodacom please call me thing. I think in terms of process, Vodacom made a mistake. But I do think we need to be careful to reward people for ideas as opposed to hard work and building something. Because it's when it gets to hard work and building something, that's when it gets tough. And anybody who's tried to build a business of some sorts would know how complicated it is. And by the way, the level of complexity is less when you're connected and you grew up a bit more privileged, but it's never really easy. Like I've met trust fund kids that are stuffing up the family's fortune because it's still difficult to build a business. So it's not easy. So I almost, I'd love to see a structure in South Africa where there's someone needs to get creative and bring tax relief to people that are building businesses. For people to build a business and take on a large amount of risk and that pressure and emotional toll to, create value, employ people, pay their salaries, I think they should be rewarded and get rich. And very much so. And the great thing about entrepreneurs is they spend money. They're not, they'll either buy toys or they'll invest in another business or
basically.
And I've once heard a comment, and this is a very American capitalistic thing to say, but they said that the best form of charity you can do is to spend money and not to give it away. Okay? And
to spend money and not to give it away.
And not give it away. Because when someone buys from me, if I deliver a service, someone buys me, there's honor in that, right? And I have to work now for it. And when I'm done with the work and I get the money, I feel like, wow, I've achieved something. I've earned my money, right? And that gets me into this habit of going, I want to up the value, I want to do more of it. So that actually helps me.
Got you. As opposed to giving it away.
As opposed to giving a handout.
Okay.
And then I don't value that. Like I can tell you money I got for free, and there were points in my life where, there was something that was a bit more lucky than other things and got money without that much hard work. That money gets wasted. Like it's just, it burns a hole through your pocket.
Yeah.
Like if you win money, like it's not inherent money.
It goes as quick as it came.
Yeah, exactly. And then often you feel horrible afterwards, right? So a lot of people think, if I can just get money, I'm going to be happy. No, if you work hard and you earn money and you earn lots of money, you're going to be happy. But then you also treat that money completely differently. Money I've earned, I'm much more diligent in making sure we're not spending it in places, in the wrong places. We want to make sure it's protected, it's sustained. And that's what builds wealth over generations, right? It's the ability to say, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to be frugal with what I've earned because I know the effort it took to actually get there. So
I think that's a good point just on this. I think a lot of people don't have that mentality around money. And this is something that I'm also working on how I, coming from a scarce background, like you, like my parents provided opportunities and a really good childhood, but we weren't wealthy. And there's always that crutch about money being there's not enough, right? So it's really something that to continue to work on how I view spending and not view spending as wasting money, because that's also a different mentality.
Wrong mentality.
How have you kind of like refined that, your mindset around money?
I think it's an ongoing thing. I've also gotten to a point to challenge myself a bit more to, how can I, when should I spend money and how? And I think a good way to think about it is in the context of time, right? So you think about how much, there's this book, someone told me about the book, I haven't read it, but I read the title, I'm like, that makes sense. I think it's called Buy Back Your Time. Go read it and tell me if it's great. But the concept really is like, if I'm spending an hour on a specific task and I can pay someone to do that task, and what I'm paying them is less than what I could earn in that hour, earning value to something else, then obviously I should be doing that. And I think that's almost a good way to interchangeably think about time, money, and risk, as a currency that can be interchanged. And I think when you start thinking about that, it changes your perspective. And a good example is, getting someone in our house to come and help every day of the week, right? It's actually quite a big expense. But if I take the time and effort that it would take with 3 kids to do those things, I'm like, I can make more money applying myself elsewhere.
Great.
And by the way, I mean, I'm also very much challenged to make sure what I'm paying that person is way above market rate, because that is a person, I value their time much more than what the market would value it. So just because that person doesn't have a university degree doesn't mean what they're adding to my life isn't valuable. So it's also that context, because I think something I learned, when we employed a lot of people, you get what you pay for. Like, yes. You can get away with underpaying someone, but they're just not going to be that into it. And I almost thought of myself as well, like, as soon as the company's making more money and I'm getting more money, it's almost as if I'm leaning in more and like I'm really just more into it than I was a few months earlier. It's an interesting dynamic, and I'm not one for toys or making lots of money. It's not the point. The point is just there's an association between money and value that, if you pay someone a certain amount, you're showing them that's how much you value them. And that almost rubs off on them, and then they go, well, I'm supposed to deliver at least that amount of value in exchange. Whatever they think that value is, right? And generally people are kind of on the same page of what that is.
And that's such an owner mindset compared to an employee mindset. Because the owner mindset is basically saying, where can I buy back my time? And the employee mindset is basically saying, oh, I don't have enough for that.
Yeah.
It's a scarce mindset.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that is the shift that, we need to make.
Yeah.
Coming into the open letter, why did you start?
So when I left the incubator, one of the reasons I left is, I really enjoyed working with the founders. Really enjoyed helping them figure out their problems, making progress. The part that I didn't enjoy as much is government needed a lot of reporting, and there was a lot of other things around what we were doing that I didn't feel like was energizing me or was adding as much value to what I enjoyed doing, which is helping the founders. So I left the incubator and then I went into consulting. So I worked on quite a few interesting projects in the blockchain space. Learned a significant amount about blockchain, interesting, but not as much the technology as opposed to the philosophy and the structure and how it could play a role in the future of finance, really. So I really enjoyed that. But then always helped different startups with different things. So worked with a lot of different founders. The problem with consulting, obviously is if you don't have hours to sell, you can't make more money. So it doesn't scale. Like you can't take off and go on holiday because you need to sell hours. Like it's or you can, but then client has expectations. Even if you have enough, it's just a complicated. It's like being an employee without any employee benefits.
Yeah.
So
You have all responsibility as well.
yes, and then I signed up while I was at the incubator. One of the founders told me I should go sign up for this newsletter called The Hustle, which is a newsletter in America. It was a daily newsletter about startups and interesting business things, like kind of, but written in a very conversational style. And it really appealed to me because it was so engaging. It was actually, for the first time in my life, I got an email that I wanted to read every day. And I saw that, and I'm like, these guys are onto something. Turns out they were, because they sold to HubSpot, I think, for $27 million.
A newsletter.
A newsletter.
Goodness. Do you know how many subscribers they had at the
They
time?
had 2.5 million.
Okay.
So, but then I went into Sam Parr's story, listened to some of the stuff. And Sam Parr is a very interesting guy. He's the founder of Hustle. And Sam Parr speaks about, like, a lot of people start a business and they try and go for a moonshot and then it just doesn't work, right? So they try and build a billion rand business.
A unicorn.
A unicorn. And it doesn't work. Because it doesn't work for 99.9% of people. It doesn't work. It's too complicated. Okay? And there aren't so many opportunities that can result in business that size. So a lot of people, and me as well, when I started in my 20s, I said, cool, I'm going to go for a big business. This is going to be it. We're going to build 4i, we're going to sell it, we're going to make a lot of money, and we're never going to work again. That's a dream. The problem is that you need to understand, like, what is the capability of a business? Like, what can it become, right? And then actually just build it to be that, and then run it for what it is, okay? So Sam Parr said, he started a hot dog stand, literally, turned it into a franchise. He sold the franchise, and then he had a bit of money, and then he said, cool, you'll start the next thing. But he had these stage gates of saying, cool, my first exit will be X, second exit will be 5X, third exit will be 10X, but the fourth exit will be my retirement money, and I'll be 40 by then, okay? And I love that analogy to say, like, well, whatever you have in your hands right now, what kind of business can you build in the next 5 years that that you can build with what you have in your hands, that could reach a certain size, that you can have a certain kind of exit that gives you a stepping stone for the next phase. So that was one of the stuff. So I looked at this newsletter. I thought, wow, the style is cool. Love how engaging it is. I can see this is the future. Social algorithms are starting to penalize company accounts in order to get them to pay to be boosted. So that's not going to work. Like, these guys are gatekeepers. Like, if you want to engage consumers, email is definitely the way. So that was the first one. I saw how Hustle did it. The second one is Sam's analogy of saying, well, can you build a business that you can sell within the next 5 years to get you to the next stage gate of where you want to go? And I did some calculations, Excel business models, they always work, right? So I did some calculations. I said, cool, this thing in 5 years, I believe it could be of a size that it would be worth my time and effort to build in the next 5 years. And then the third thing was, working in startup space for a very long time, I always wanted a product like the Openator. So I always wanted to stay up to date with what's happening, who's building interesting things, get something that I read that inspires me to think differently about some of the problems we're solving. And I could never find it. I made lists on Twitter. We shared links on Slack. There was never a consolidated thing or consolidated view of what's happening in the South African startup space. And big shout out to guys like VentureBurn and Disrupt Africa, and those guys have done great work. But I think what we thought we could bring differently is, having worked with startups for so long and having had a great network in the startup space, our understanding of the space is a bit different. And great startup advice always tells you, build something that solves your own problem, right?
Yeah.
So for us, it's like, whenever we do something, it's like, would I like that? Is that something I would do or enjoy? So those three things kind of lined up and said, cool, this is a business I can build while I'm consulting, because we write the email once a week in the beginning. I can do that. And then once we grow big enough, we can start generating revenue, and I can 1 foot out of consulting, and eventually I had a plan of how that could become a business. And then 2 guys came across my path. One went to school with me, Alvon. I haven't really spoken in 20 years. He wanted to do more work in the tech space as a writer. and asked if I can introduce him to a few people. I said, cool, let me just pitch my idea before we talk about intro. So I pitched the open letter idea to him, and within 5 minutes he's like, I'm in, when can we start?
Wow.
This was now 2 years ago, so literally Saturday 2 years ago we sent our first email.
Amazing. And from there, so how did you essentially, distribute and get those early subscribers?
So it was quite a challenge for us to start. When Alvon came, it became easier. But before that, this part I didn't tell was Jason also came on board. But Jason and I were like, how do we start? We're like writing something that we didn't send out. And that just doesn't work. So eventually we said 2 November it's going out. And that was 2 weeks before 2 November. And then I said, guys, I don't want to be sending this to 5 people. Like friends and family just send to 100 people. We want to send at least, I think we've got 102 for. Our first send went to 102 people. And then, it went slightly, not viral. People told other people, kept talking about it on LinkedIn. And then I did a lot of research on how the hustle did ads, because a big thing that people think you start, I also thought so. Start a newsletter, people like it, and everybody signs up. Okay. It doesn't work that way, even if the newsletter's great. It doesn't work that way. You do get referrals, you do get organic and viral signups. They happen, but they happen at an extremely slow pace. Okay, and often your pace needs to be faster than what it happens organically. And there's a reason for that. I grew up, and when I grew up, there were different seasons for me reading different magazines, right? So there was a time as a teenage boy, I loved the FHM. I'm like, that's great stuff in it. But I also read the New Age Gaming, which was a gaming magazine when I was a lot into gaming. But that was a season, it was for a time period. So when it comes to email newsletters, we're very much like that as well. There's a season where you consume it a lot more than other seasons, then you unsubscribe. Right?
It also makes sense with not just newsletters, but podcast.
Anything, any kind of content. We go through seasons, and life happens and things change.
Yeah.
Priorities change, interests change, those kind of things, right? So the reason I'm sharing that is like you need to grow your newsletter faster than organic in order to capture the most people you can that are interested in this season, to build the kind of momentum, to build the numbers. So looking at the hustle, they did a lot of ads. I literally copy-pasted their ad that worked the best. And I ran an ad like that, exactly the same ad, but focused on South Africa. And then very funny, someone who used to write for the hustle was a Cape Townian lady. She comments on it, she goes, you copied the hustle's ad. And I replied, relax, I'm just hustling. And I ended up having a chat with her, and we chat every now and again. But the first chat, she actually said, cool, I had an hour-long chat with Sam Parr. He told me everything about the hustle. What do you want to know? I'm like, this is the best chat ever. So she gave me a lot of insights into how the hustle works and worked. We just grew it from there. So we kind of took about a year, 14 months of slowish growth up to about 4,000 subs. And in the beginning of the year, we really ramped up our marketing efforts, and we really got the mechanics and the how that works well. So we signed up another 10,000 this year. So we're at 14,000 now, and we consistently sign about 1,000 to 2,000 a month.
It's so interesting, like everyone thinks that you have to reinvent the wheel, when in actual fact you saw something that worked.
Yeah.
It worked in America, cool.
Yeah.
And you just applied it to the South African market and ecosystem.
Yeah, and it was, what was great about it is I never would have had the confidence to run ads, right? Because I've never run ads in my life on social. I don't know what I'm doing.
Where did you run? On LinkedIn?
On LinkedIn and on Meta.
Okay.
If you told me run an ad, I wouldn't have done it because I don't know what will work. But I looked at their ad and I'm like, I think it can work. Everybody says it works. Let me try it. And it did work to a degree. But that actually told me how Meta works and how LinkedIn's ads work. And then we did our own ads. Don't look like that. Completely different text, different images. Not the same thing whatsoever. And they work way better. But it actually gave us the confidence to try and actually got that first thing going. So I think when you're not confident in doing something, just copy someone else, because then you'll learn it and then you can adjust as you go.
So we were speaking about monetization before we started rolling. Tell us about the challenges and what's your thoughts on monetizing something like the open letter?
So I think firstly, I've never built a media business before. And that's been an eye-opener because how media works is completely different to anything else. Also, really cool idea to try and do media sales in what was likely a recession, even though technically it wasn't reported as such. Because the first thing that gets cut when money is down is marketing, right? So everybody's like, we already cut. Like now you're introducing a new thing. So that's been challenging. But I think what we do is we offer a marketing arbitrage, right? So there's someone else can advertise on Meta or LinkedIn, just like we do, right? We run ads, they can run ads. We can convince someone to sign up to our newsletter for substantially less than what one of people that want to speak to that audience can on LinkedIn, right? That's the first one. They have to pay a lot more, right? Because what we offer is something of value, as opposed to a sale of something.
Curated.
Yeah, so we bring someone into our space, but now a second thing happens. Now we get a different medium to engage them with. So we've got longer form, more engaging. So if you think about people that want to explain the benefit of what they have to offer, right? It's very hard to do that in traditional digital media. So it's hard to do on LinkedIn. You've got an image. It's hard to do on Instagram. You can maybe make a video, but someone can just scroll past it, right? So if we've got an email that's quite engaging and someone's used to reading it, and we put something in there and write it in a way that it adds value to their life, but also communicate what this product or service is about, the engagement's much higher. So that's really the thinking around how we do it. I think what's really difficult is explaining that to people. Because it's quite a new channel, right? I mean, people in South Africa don't market in newsletters.
Explaining it to potential customers.
Yes. And also finding that balance. It's fascinating. I engage with corporates, like the spend isn't important for them, but just the time they have to spend to generate content. And like, now I have to spend 2 days a month to write content for your 15,000 audience, where I can spend 2 days write a TV script and it goes on D's TV. And then, okay, maybe 15,000 people see it. But the perception is more people will see it, right? But then, now you need to try and compare apples with apples. It gets complicated. How engaged is my audience versus their audience? Like, who is in my audience versus that audience? And that stuff is difficult. So we do media sales. We run some sponsored ads, but we've also successfully managed to package a partnership where we say, cool, people that really believe long term the value that we're adding is adding value to the ecosystem and the community, and want to benefit from that goodwill that we are busy generating in the community, they can partner with us for a period of 6 months or longer. And in that, we'll give some exposure to some of the great stuff they have to offer for our audience. In exchange, they pay us some money for that. And then we look for other opportunities to do some creative things like webinars, online engagements, workshops, one-on-one sessions, those kind of things. And that's been going really well. So recently signed up, a good example is Xero, they're a partner of ours now, the accounting software. Nice. So we're working with them on some nice engagements and interactions to do some stuff with them. We've got Lulalend, which is the bank, so they're also on board. And then some other providers that service the startup ecosystem.
And it's also so helpful to get that first.
The first one, yeah.
Of course.
There was a trick with that, by the way.
Yeah.
So we run our emails on a platform called Beehive.
Okay.
And by the way, shout out to Beehive, like incredible product. Like,
I agree.
If you want to do email, Beehive is the one.
I second that.
So Beehive has this thing they call the ad network, and then they send some ads to you from. So they centralize ad sales, right? So they've got people that go out to big brands and get them to buy a bunch of ads, and then they send out to all the newsletters on Beehive and go, hey, do you want to run an ad for these guys? This is how much they'll pay you for a click. And what they pay for a click isn't great, and you don't always get a lot of money from it. But when we started we intentionally started putting the ads in the newsletter, because when we did, other people saw that and they're like, hey, check, this brand is sponsoring the newsletter. There must be something happening. And then we started getting inquiries and people started understanding what an ad could look like. So I remember one of the very first ones we ran was from Monday.com. And then I'd meet people like, wow, I can't believe Monday.com is sponsoring your newsletter. I'm like, yeah, it's cool. The reality is we got 300 Rand for it, if it was that much for that ad.
But the name.
Massive bargain for Monday.com. But people thought Monday.com phoned me or emailed me and said, can we sponsor a newsletter? But that's actually not what happened. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a reason why I share this as well, because if somebody asked me, how did you get it? I would have told them. But people don't ask. They just assume. They just assume that is, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite a. I've heard so many startups use that hack in how they get that initial growth.
Yeah.
Startups are getting a pilot with a corporate, taking a selfie in front of that corporate store, sharing it on LinkedIn, going, "Great working with Pep." And everybody thinks, "Wow, Pep bought the whole solution." No, they're just running it in one small store. But then, Mr. Price phones and goes, "We need that solution," and then you land the whole Mr. Price group. And I'd never encourage anybody to be insincere or untruthful or lie about it.
Don't fake it.
Don't lie.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's important to be aware of the perception and how people think and perceive things.
I think what you're talking about is really just being innovative and the word I was thinking about was resourceful.
Yeah.
And I think that is, as founders, entrepreneurs, no budget. If you're not resourceful, you're going to suffer.
Exactly.
That's something I learned. And another question I had was fostering two-way communication. So, building something, you generating an audience. How do you ensure that there's a constant kind of feedback loop? Whatever you learn from fostering two-way communication.
Yeah, so we need to do way more of it. But a very interesting chat I had with someone who worked in a magazine space for a very long time. If you recall in magazines of olden days, like the first few pages, it's like the letter from the editor, right? And then they'll have like a table of contents, or what do you call it? And then right after that, they'll have this section where you can write a letter in and the editor responds to you. So someone who worked in magazines for a long time told me like that was the most important part of the magazine, because it makes the audience feel like they're part of the conversation. Even if they don't send a letter in, they feel like they're part of the conversation. The editor speaks to me, like they replied to Susanne's request for advice with her husband, or whatever the case may be. So that creates this loop, this feedback loop. And then Beehive offers this great thing where you can have a poll in your newsletter. So we started creating 2 polls. The one poll is actually about the topic that we talk about. And we use it very strategically. One, it's for humor. So we put interesting and funny stuff in there sometimes. So it's part of the content strategy.
Some nice memes.
And the second part is that people can comment on it, but then they can actually type a comment. So they can add context to it. So let's say we ask, what do you hate most about your bank? Okay. And then we'll say one of the options is my banker is really annoying. Okay. So then someone can pick that, but then they can write something and we get that on Beehive at the back. And then in the next follow-up email, we'll actually, feature those comments in the email. So that creates a bit of a similar loop than what magazines had. Also, very diligent. Like if anybody listening to this, if you ever reply to email, I'll always reply. So I make sure we reply to emails and keep conversations going. So people that get our email, they can literally reply and it comes to me, I reply to it. So try and do that. And then the other thing is, something we're going to start now is actually randomly picking people to interview. So if we've seen someone reads, based on a certain cadence, we'll email them and ask them, can we just have like a quick chat, 15 minutes, we just want to learn a bit. So we're busy developing that cadence to constantly get feedback as to what people enjoy about the product. It's a weird thing. We build a new product twice a week, right? So every email is a brand new product, because you can literally blank canvas and do something completely different.
Yeah.
Right. So, which is very different to something else. Like normally you have a product and you iterate on the existing thing.
Whereas you can literally...
I can literally build a new product. So I can go, everybody hates this, let's start something new. And then it's something new. Which gives a lot of flexibility, but also you need to have a lot of restraint. Like if you change too much, I think you are breaking the promise that you gave people when they signed up the first time.
Good point. And you're confusing your readers or audience. Yeah. And in terms of authenticity, so I think the reason why things do well, specifically a podcast, is because of the people being authentic in it, right? And with a very noisy and saturated social media marketplace with lots of content out there. How do you ensure that you essentially like remain authentic and true to you as opposed to, outside in?
I think it's complicated because I think you probably have to know yourself really well to know the difference between when you're not being authentic and when not. We try and keep things interesting based on what we will find interesting, and I think there's a level of authenticity in there. And then I think a big part of our culture, internally, we're a bunch of volunteers really, and we have a lot of fun. And I think it's quite important to keep that going because that almost created like a cult-like thing on the inside. Like our culture is almost like, the amount of time and effort people put in just because they're having fun is crazy. And I think that spills over into some of the stuff we make and create, which I think is super important. It's like, and I don't think there's a recipe for. I think a large part of it's luck, to be honest, like getting the right people at the right time. And I'd love to be able to say, here's a recipe to get 5 great people to work for free and build a cult-like culture. Like, they just enjoy the stuff we're doing. We're keeping it light. We're keeping it fun.
Interesting. Renier, this was super, super cool. I am going to ask you, the last part of the podcast is called the Fast Fire.
Sure.
So I'm going to ask you these questions, and if you could answer in a word or a short sentence, that would be great. So I'm giving you $10 million blank check, but you can only use it to invest in one industry in South Africa. What would that be? And why?
I think first thing that comes to mind is agriculture. I think there's a lot of opportunity still for agriculture. And the beautiful thing about agriculture, right? SaaS products don't get consumed, they get used. Okay? The output of agriculture get consumed. Okay? If we don't eat, we don't live. Okay? We can cancel SaaS products and still be okay. So there's something beautiful about, produce that, there's always going to be a market for it. And there's so much more potential. I think we can do a lot more in that space in South Africa. So I wouldn't go agriculture, but agri-tech I think is massive opportunity.
Yeah, that's interesting. And what would the qualities of a founder be like? So what would give you the confidence to be like, this is my jockey?
I think resourcefulness, but that's kind of the obvious one. Let me think about a more niche one. I think it's very important to be a likable person, to get along with people, but also be very firm in convictions and direction that you want to go. I think if you don't get along with people, you're not going to make it. Because inevitably you have to hire people, you have to sell to customers. So someone that's a people person that can sell, but also very strong in convictions.
Charisma and good leadership.
Yeah.
Not afraid to make the hard decisions and let people go.
And go for what they want. Like really be stubborn about that.
One piece of advice to early stage founders.
Narrow your focus. Just go, like I mentioned it earlier, but if there are 5 different ways to do it or 5 different markets you could serve, literally pick one and say, well, if I spend 80 hours in the next 5 days to just see how much I can get done around this one thing, I think that's a wonderful exercise. It's difficult because you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know what you should do, shouldn't do. But it's almost like saying, well, instead of trying to do 5 things, double down on one thing. And even after that, if you add the second thing, doesn't matter.
What would you like to see change or improve in the ecosystem in the coming years, or in South Africa in general? Just
more collaboration. I think more collaboration is more economic activity. More economic activity is progress for everyone.
Collaboration between?
Just people buying from other people, people using people's services, people spending money with other companies. And that's a lot about what we do, is to actually showcase people and their companies in order for people to use their services if they think that would be useful and helpful. And we see that happening, and it's amazing when it happens, because it's like, it's happening. But that's really, our heart is to champion founders and their startups. and that means if more of them win, all of us win.
Yeah.
So
I like that mentality. Next steps, what can you share with us? What's in the pipeline, personally and professionally?
Yeah, so professionally building the newsletter out. Also, we've got a content writing service called Stream, which we're also building out. That's going really well. We help scale-ups that have property market fit to do written content for them. So we build a few newsletters for a few other companies, and that's going really well. On the newsletter side, we're splitting up the newsletter, the podcast, and our community into 3 different brands. It became a bit confusing. You're like on the open letter, but there's a podcast. It doesn't sound like it should be a podcast. So we're restructuring all of that. And our paid for community is growing nicely. So we're having a lot of fun in there, getting a lot of people help, getting a lot of people connections. So excited to see that growing as well.
Nice. I like it. Renier, thank you. This was amazing. Super insightful. Always great to chat to you. And thank you for the impact that you're making.
Awesome.
You continue to just not only help a lot of founders, but you are trailblazing and leading by example. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Cool.